Atlantis, where horses raced, gods lived, and people think it's lost to the sea, or even that it never existed at all. The Atlantis story is a tricky one to navigate, as it's wrapped up in only a few written places. The most famous being Plato, who lived 427 to 348 BC, and Plato wrote about Atlantis in a work called Timaeus and a work called Critias written in 360 BC, but the story goes back 9,000 years before Plato's own lifetime. All the quotes are from one of those texts. So why are people so obsessed with Atlantis? Let's look at one of the key passages. The central island was the inner island home to the Temple of Poseidon and Plato, and where the royal family lived. The temple was grand, built of precious materials like gold, silver and orichalcum, and it housed a colossal statue of Poseidon. This was the political and religious heart of Atlantis, where rulers would meet to discuss governance. The second ring of land, the royal and administrative district containing the palaces of the royal family and high-ranking officials. It was the political centre of Atlantis, where decisions about the empire were made. The third ring of land was the residential and commercial areas, where the general population lived with markets, workshops, homes and trading, so this was the most economically active part of the city. In between the three rings of land were three rings of water, creating both security and transport around the islands. The setup of lots in the description of Atlantis makes it about 90,000 square miles, which is roughly the size of the UK. However, Plato describes it as the rings of islands bigger than ancient Libya and Asia Minor. Asia Minor, which is current-day Turkey, and ancient Libya are shown on the map in red. If you combined modern-day Libya and Turkey areas, you'd be looking at 1 million square miles. I think ancient Libya may be even bigger. So, why the difference? Well, I think we're talking about Atlantis in its prime, and then what it became, two very different sized places. Looking at the map, you can see 7 of the 8 places marked as theoretical locations Atlantis could be. The 8th is Antarctica on the bottom of the globe. Let's start by looking inside the Pillars of Hercules, so that means everything to the right of the markers shown. Number 1, Santorini, or Thera, in Greece. Why? Well, Santorini was the birthplace of the advanced Minoan civilization. The island was hugely impacted by a volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE that caused the island to be partially submerged and destroying Minoan cities, which brought life to the theory of how Atlantis could have disappeared so rapidly. The argument? Well, the destruction of the island aligns with Plato's description of Atlantis being swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Why not? Well, there's no evidence of the island being affected quite that quickly. The island itself is miniature, and it is the wrong side of the Pillars of Heracles, or Hercules as they're known. 2. Crete and the Minoan civilization. Why? Well, the Minoan civilization, based on the island of Crete, was one of the most advanced civilizations in the ancient world. Like Santorini, it was affected by the eruption, which caused earthquakes and tsunamis. The argument is the Minoans were a powerful maritime force, much like Plato's description of Atlantis, leading to the notion that it was Crete and the Minoans that inspired Plato's writing. Why not? Well, bigger than Santorini, but still way too small, and it's the wrong side of the Pillars of Hercules, and the only real link is that it had supremacy of the seas for a period. Number 3, Malta. Why? Malta has some of the oldest megalithic, roughly 4,500 to 1500 BCE structures in the world, and some theorists maintain that these would have had to have been created by an advanced civilization, as Atlantis was. The argument? Well, the island's ancient history and proximity to the Mediterranean fit some interpretations of the Atlantis location. Why not? Well, it's tiny. It's the wrong side of the Pillars of Hercules. Megalith's earliest timeline is 4,500 BCE, and Plato was writing about 10,000 BCE and earlier, so it doesn't fit time-wise. 4. Sardinia, Italy. Why? Well, there's a suggestion that Sardinia was once Atlantis, because on Sardinia was a Nuragic civilization known for its buildings, known as nuraghi, which were tower-type fortresses which may have inspired the story of Atlantis. The argument is a massive flood caused by a tsunami may have devastated the island, leading to the idea of Atlantis sinking. Why not? Well, the timeline's in dispute, but starting around 1700 BC, it's way too late, and even though it's bigger than the other islands, still about a tenth of the size Plato described, and the wrong side of the Pillars of Hercules. The Donana Marshlands. Why? Well, in southern Spain near the Donana National Park, some archaeologists believe they've found traces of a sunken city that could match Atlantis due to satellite imagery that point to the remnants of ancient structures. The argument is the location is close to the Strait of Gibraltar, fitting with Plato's description, and the area was once hit by a tsunami, possibly submerging the city. Why not? Well, this is only just after the Pillars of Hercules, but only just. And it's not its own continent or island, and the evidence is that satellite pictures show there was a settlement that includes circular rings which appear to be platforms, but are not nearly big enough, and the area's not nearly big enough. Number 6. The Azores Islands, Atlantic Ocean. Why? Well, located far out in the Atlantic Ocean, the Azores are a group of islands that some claim were part of a large landmass that could have sunk after a catastrophic event. The argument is the location fits Plato's description of Atlantis being beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Strait of Gibraltar, which would have placed it in the Atlantic. Why not? Well, the Azores are not Atlantis on its own, but technically they are part of Atlantis, which I'll show you shortly. It is the right side of the Pillars, but the original Atlantis continent was huge. The Azores are way too small on their own. Number 7. The Caribbean. Why? Well, some speculate that remnants of Atlantis could be found near Cuba or the Bahamas, where unusual water formations like the so-called Bimini Road have been discovered. The argument is supporters argue that their underwater structures resemble man-made constructions and could be linked to Atlantis. Why not? Whilst the Bimini Road looks to be either a freak of nature or more likely man-made, the area is way outside of the maps and does not really offer any other evidence to support it being Atlantis. 8. Antarctica. Why? Well, Atlantis could have been located in what is now Antarctica due to a dramatic shift in the Earth's crust, supposedly causing the continent to move to its present location at the bottom of the world, leading to the destruction of Atlantis. The argument is supporters of this theory believe the ancient maps, such as the Piri-Reis map, depict an ice-free Antarctica, which could have been Atlantis. Why not? So the theory is that a seismic shift could have seen Atlantis on its own move to the other side of the world. There's no evidence for this, and the Piri-Reis map and Antarctica will be covered in another episode. So where is Atlantis? Well, the description of Atlantis makes it about 90,000 square miles, which is roughly the size of the UK. However, Plato describes it as the rings of islands bigger than ancient Libya and Asia Minor, which sizes it combined at 1 million square miles. I think as we look here, you can see the smaller Atlantis map and the larger Atlantean Continent. I've mapped both the continent and the island map, and I'm about to show you something that I believe proves the map was real, and this is where the continent was. Now, this more basic map is used in many places showing Atlantis. It is pretty basic, and first of all needs turning around. Now, what I'm doing is overlaying this simple map over the draining the oceans until dry to show you how the matching up works. This simple map does not line up very well with the landmass once we have drained the ocean. You can make it fit a little bit better by turning it, but it's not wholly convincing. Let's move on to this more detailed map that shows the Atlantean Continent with the ice shelf pretty far south across America on the left of the map, across to the middle of the map showing the Atlantean Continent stretching all of the way down towards South America. On the right hand side you see Europe joined to Africa, and so you could have walked from Africa to America. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Hercules. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent, which surrounded the true ocean, for this sea, which is within the Straits of Hercules, is only a harbour having a narrow entrance, but that other is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a boundless continent. As we play the Draining the Ocean film and lower the ocean levels, we can see at exactly the point that the water level shows the lakes that were on the original continent map were lakes in reality that match in several places, in the same place, in the same shape, that prove for me beyond any conceivable doubt that the island matched the map pretty much exactly. And that proved for me that the Atlantean Continent map is real and that Atlantis is here. So we have the map and the map within a map. With a much smaller Atlantis showing the map does a good job of showing the continent and the island that was left. The reason for the two sizes of Atlantis and two maps is explained here. Many great deluges have taken place during the 9,000 years, and during all this time and through so many changes, the earth has fallen away all round and sunk out of sight. The consequences is that in comparison of what then was, there are remaining only the bones of the wasted body, as they may be called, as in the case of small islands, all the richer and softer parts of the soil having fallen away, and the mere skeleton of the land being left. The whole country is only a long promontory, which is the sticking out bit of a headland, extending far into the sea away from the rest of the continent, while the surrounding basin of the sea is everywhere deep in the neighbourhood of the shore. As you can see clearly, the continent stretches out with a landmass way down past the West Indies. The ice wall I mentioned earlier is visible. There was an Atlantean continent, which was the Libya plus the Asia Minor combined. This was the country or continent. Atlantis was the Rome or Athens of its time, the super city that built a harbour to trade rings of power for safety and prestige. And then the rest of the continent to the north goes towards the ice wall you saw on the map. So it's going to be pretty more barren and less populated due to the climate. So now we know where it is. Can we find the rings? And they dug a canal which passed through the zones of land from the island to the sea, with no mention of rock or rings of rock that you'd be able to find now underwater. They dug canals out of earth to form waterways, the way they have been dug all across the world. You won't find the stone rings because they were never there. So when did it exist? Well, there's a map that shows the UK connected to Europe through a landmass called Doggerland. The map on the right hand side shows the ice wall's most southern tip at the same place as the main Atlantis artefact. What is clear is that the ice wall came down across most of the UK, and the two models largely match, although the Atlantis map shows the ice shelf even lower across northern Europe. This model dates this ice shield to be 20,000 BC, so we can say with some certainty from the writings of Plato. Let me begin by observing first of all that 9,000 was the sum of years which had elapsed since the war which was said to have taken place between those who dwelt outside the pillars of Heracles and all who dwelt within them. And he wrote the works 360 BC, 12 years before he died in 348 BC. So Plato talked about Atlantis 9,500 BC. The map of the Atlantean Continent shows the ice shelf which matches up to our model at 20,000 BC. So Atlantis must have been even older than that. Okay, so if it's so large, how come no one has found it? Well, because everyone was looking for something small rather than something huge. Find the continent, find the city, find the place. What do you think is left of Atlantis? The most likely things remaining are the metals and the statue. The metals are really key here. The circuit wall they covered with a coating of brass. The circuit of the next wall they coated with tin. And the third flashed with the red light of Orichalcum. In the interior of the city dwelt an enclosure of gold. And there was Poseidon's own temple, which was covered with silver. And the pinnacles with gold. The roof was of ivory adorned with gold and silver and orichalcum. Now orichalcum was dug out of the earth in many parts of the island, and this is where interesting gets amazing, as these very metals were not seen until 2015 when a 6th century shipwreck was found to have 39 ingots of this very metal on board. X-rays showed the 39 discovered ingots were an alloy of 75-80% copper, 15-20% zinc and the rest nickel, lead and iron, and match this red light metal description. So what's going to be left? The precious metals of gold, silver, orichalcum and perhaps the Poseidon statue, as long as it was hard stone to survive being underwater. If you're looking for a stone ring formation, you are going to find it because they aren't stone, so they're gone. But if you're looking for metal, that may be something you can find, but you need a pretty big metal detector and a lot of patience. Do I think someone will ever find remnants of Atlantis? Short answer, yes. Do I think you'll ever find a sunken city? Short answer, no. Why not? Well, the buildings would be long gone and be rubble on the sea floor, unable to be distinguished from random stones. So what should we look for? Metal, sheets of gold, silver and orichalcum from the buildings around a statue or statues, assuming the pirates hadn't figured out the same thing I have and dive for it. Then what you're looking for is a statue of Poseidon made of rock at the bottom of the sea, which is going to be pretty hard to find. Do you think Atlantis is real or a myth? Well, it's real, but it's a big old area to cover. How is it connected? The question of what happened to it is, I think, a relatively simple one to answer. Either there was a large flood, sea levels rose, or the large flood was the sea levels rising in a very short time frame. This could have been caused by earthquake, or more probably melting icebergs. There is talk of a great flood in the book of Genesis as Noah's flood, and is actually only one of hundreds or so called myths that all happen to talk at the exact same time of the exact same thing. The Great Flood will be covered in another episode. But there is more than enough evidence to accept it could have changed the landscape very quickly, including covering Atlantis.